Good afternoon, and thank you for attending the Top 5 Public Governance Challenges and Solutions webinar for 2018. I am going to review a few webinar housekeeping announcements. This webinar will last 45 minutes and will conclude at 1 p.m. We ask that you all mute your lines, and we encourage you to send your questions into the question and answer box on the side panel of GoToWebinar, and we will address them at the end. We will record the session and it will be shared afterwards, and along with the link and the recording and the slides will be emailed after the webinar. I'm actually going to turn over the webinar now to Dottie Schindlinger, today's moderator.
Great, thank you so much, Amanda, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm here today with my two co-presenters. I am Dottie Schindlinger. I am the Vice President and Governance Technology Evangelist for Board Docs. I'm also joined today by Laura Vautour, who's our Senior E-Governance Specialist for the education market, and Michelle Cooper, who's our Senior E-Governance Specialist for the government market. We're going to be talking today about some of the top 5 challenges that we're seeing in governance for 2018. And some of these challenges are not specific to this year. Some of them are a bit more perennial, but some of them do have interesting implications this year. So we're going to dive into those topics. And just to remind you, all the phone lines are going to remain muted so that we can record this and have a nice clean audio line. But that does not mean that we don't want to hear from you. So please make sure to send us your questions. We'd really love to get your questions. We'll be presenting until just about 1 o'clock Eastern time, and then we're going to take questions for the final 15 minutes of the webinar, finishing the entire thing at 1:15. And all you have to do to send your questions in is put them into the GoToWebinar control panel. You'll see a Q&A box, so please take a minute and put your questions right into that Q&A box. So just to get started, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the public governance challenges that are kind of hot for this year. And as I mentioned, some of them may really be things that happen almost every year, but remain hot. So we're going to address them for 2018 in this webinar. And then I'll be turning it over to my two colleagues who will share a few solutions that we think will really help you to address those challenges and provide some specific examples from the field. So just to get us started, the top 5 challenges that we've identified for this year, first we're going to talk a little bit about community engagement. And this is one of those issues that tends to be a kind of a perennial issue. How do we appropriately engage our communities so that we are really having them be part of the governance process in a really constructive way and not potentially kind of be a disruptive force. I guess that's probably the best way to say it. So how can we deal with that issue effectively? How can we make sure that we have adequate levels of transparency? And given that we're now in 2018, transparency might mean some different things than it has in the past. And so we'll talk a bit about that issue. We're also going to address some issues around cybersecurity. 2017 was a new high watermark for levels of cyber attack and cyber risk, particularly in the public sector. So we're going to talk about some of the things that need to be on your radar for 2018, and in particular, some of the latest data. In fact, we'll be sharing some data that has not yet even gone to press yet. It's some research that we've done in concert with the National School Board Association. We'll be giving you a preview of a handful of some of the statistics that have been learned through that research. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about boardroom culture and planning for the future. Again, boardroom culture, one of those perennial issues. Planning for the future, some very interesting things that need to be on your radar for 2018. Let's start talking about community engagement and board governance. And this is a topic that we spent some time in 2017 diving into, both in the school board vertical as well as in the public governance space. And what's interesting is regardless of whether you're at a school board or whether you're at a municipality or a county government, finding ways to constructively engage the community can really be a challenge. Either there's what I would say an abundance of community engagement where maybe there are numbers of citizens that are sort of arming themselves to take a stance or take action against something the board is doing that the board feels is really in the best interest of the community, and there's now this kind of head-to-head battle going on between the board and the community. Or it could be that community members are completely disengaged. They are not really sure what's going on. They don't come to meetings. They don't read the minutes. They don't really pay attention to what's happening unless and until something directly impacts them. And then armed with very little information, they dive in at kind of the wrong moment. So this is an important issue to get right. Obviously, it can help the board greatly if the community is up to speed on the kinds of things the board is going to be deciding. And also, if when the board has to make a really hard decision, if they can get community input early enough in the process, it often has a much better impact on the final results. So just to kind of help clarify some of this, what we think of when we think of community engagement is sort of that space there in the middle, that sort of shared governance space where we understand the role of the board, providing oversight, shaping strategy, helping to hire, support, and evaluate administration. We think of administration's role of everything operations and management, enacting the strategy, evaluating the results, keeping the board and the community informed. And the community, of course, they're the stakeholders. They're there really to either benefit or experience what happens at the board and administration level, and hopefully to provide input and feedback that can inform the strategy, and in some cases also to elect the board. So that shared governance is really just an acknowledgement that all three parties have a really important role to play in the eventual outcome of governance, whether they are making the decisions or whether they're informing the decisions or enacting the plan that was impacted by those decisions. So everyone sort of has their swim lane, but there is this overlap, and that's what we call shared governance. So just some best practices that we've been observing over the past few years and really talking about, going into 2018. It's kind of critical these days that boards and administrations are communicating potential strategy when they're still in the idea stage. One of the ways that you can get yourself into a lot of trouble is to wait until things are fully baked and then go to press. That's just not the right approach, and obviously there's lots of sunshine laws and other provisions that try to avoid that. But there are a lot of different ways that sometimes I think boards try to kind of skirt around it, maybe because it's a really tough decision or it's a bit uncomfortable, or there's a concern that there's going to be so much pushback they'll never get to a decision. But quite frankly, what we've observed and what the research really shows is that kind of the opposite is true. In actual fact, the further in advance you can involve the community before something has even been partially baked, the better it is on the back end. You get far less pushback, even when it's something highly unpopular. If the community has been clued in to the really hard choice the board is going to have to make, and that maybe there are no good options, like really, maybe there are no decisions that are going to not harm someone. And so they see what the board is weighing. When the final decision comes down, they tend to accept it much more readily, and there tends to be far less pushback and far less anger and resentment in the community. And it just builds this mutual trust. And really, partly this new reality is being fueled by technology. When you think about how immediate information is and how reactive the public can be over kind of minimal information, that's partly come about because of our 24-hour news cycle, because of social media, because of the immediacy of access to leadership. I mean, think about this new world that we live in where we know what's on the president's mind by reading Twitter. It's just a new reality, and I think we just kind of have to, love it or hate it, acknowledge that it's true, and understand that that is now the level of expectation that our communities have. And so really thinking about ways to productively engage them using all of those channels and using all of those tools. One best practice that we would recommend in that regard is when you are using all these channels and all these tools, make sure there is consistency in the messaging. What we always recommend is have one place where the community can go, where they get all the details, all the scoop, the full skinny, and make that your board portal. Make that your place where you communicate with your board anyway. Make that the place the community can go to get the real unvarnished information, dig deep, find the details, and then from there, craft messaging that goes into Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else. But make that the one touchstone that everyone knows they can trust. They can always go there and find out what's happening. And most importantly, the hallmark of good community engagement is not what we would call data dumping and dodging. So that's something that can happen. If in our zeal to communicate everything, we might over-communicate, at which point it just becomes background noise. It's no longer useful information. It's no longer actionable information. So always important to have high-level summaries, synopses, and then appendix. Put the appendices together that allow people to dig as deep as they want, but that if they have 3 seconds, they can, from a high level, understand what are the issues that are involved, what's the decision that's pending, and what do I need to know about it. And just always have a mindset of how are we going to increase trust. That feeds right into this trend around transparency. So this is another sort of top governance challenge for the year. When we think about how we need to communicate with our communities and with our boards, transparency doesn't just mean showing every single nit and noid that is happening. What it means is making sure we have meeting schedules that actually allow people to attend, not scheduling votes at 1 in the morning and not trying to avoid seeing people by scheduling it in the middle of the workday during a week that absolutely no one is going to be able to come to a meeting. Just being sensitive to that. If there are particular issues that need community involvement, schedule them around community availability. Try to make it easy, not hard, for people to participate. Also, making sure they have access to agendas really far in advance. Put those out there. Get them onto the board portal. Get them in people's hands. And making policies and minutes fully searchable, which is also something we're big fans of. At Board Docs, what we really believe in is getting all that stuff online means that people can search and find things easily, but that doesn't mean that what you've done is just loaded up a bunch of pictures of pages. Scans don't really count as searchable content. If it's just a scan and it's not been scanned in a way that the characters are recognizable, no one's going to be able to search it. So really taking the time to make sure that all of your information is friendly for searching, mobile friendly, very, very important. And then using closed sessions really appropriately and consistently. It's completely fair to have closed session at every single meeting if that's needed. And sometimes that closed session is just an opportunity for the board members to look each other in the eye and say, how is this going? Is this conversation happening the way we want it to? What might we do to engage the community better? How could we do a better job? Or really, it's an opportunity for them to talk about the things that they must talk about behind closed doors, HR issues, litigation, things that involve sensitive records that can't be shared with the public, law enforcement related issues. Those kinds of things that cannot be shared with the public really by law, that's completely fair and fine. But everything else, do it in front of a live studio audience. I mean, you kind of have to according to the law, but also there is benefit to be gained by involving the community and continuing to maintain that level of transparency. Here's just a couple little examples from some of the organizations that we've worked with. This is from Roanoke City Public Schools. I thought they did a really nice job in terms of getting their agendas up online really far in advance. And if you notice, they always include as part of their agenda a reminder of how citizens can participate in the conversation at the meeting. So how can they provide participation on the agenda items themselves? How can they participate on non-agenda items? What's appropriate? What are the norms? What's expected? They actually put that in as part of every board book, which I thought was just very clever. They also include then those full citizen participation guidelines, and you'll see that they're pretty short. They're not like a 10-page long policy. There's certainly additional details that they could dive into, but they just keep this short. Just a reminder. 15 minutes. Remember that you got to arrive on time. Remember you got to do this. It's just really simple, just to make it a little easier for people. And then in terms of policies, really making it super simple to search and find policies, naming things according to what they are, so that it's not some technical name that only one person in the business office would know what it means, with a bunch of letters and numbers and dates that don't actually spell words, but naming things according to what they are so that when you search for them, they're easy to find. And then having everything laid out so that you can easily recover the information. Last couple of points, and then I'm going to turn it over to talk a bit about solutions as well as some examples. This one is really a hot issue. So there's a couple of data points that would be important for you to know. One is that with cybersecurity, 2017, when I said it was a new high watermark, just to put some context around that, there were more cyber breaches in the first 6 months of 2017 than there was in the entire year of 2016. And the last 6 months of 2017 were in fact worse than the first 6 months. So that kind of gives you a sense for how bad things have really gotten. It's fair to say that hackers have incredibly upped their game. More people are becoming hackers. There are nation states that are doing hacking and sponsoring hacking groups. Part of this is being fueled by the explosion of value of cryptocurrency and cybercurrency like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is now trading at some ridiculous number, like 4,000% of its original value. And because of that, there's just been an explosion of ransomware. Ransomware being bad, malicious emails that get sent to people. They infect the network and then allow the hacker to hijack all the content on that network, either with the intention of breaching it and leaking it, or just simply holding on to it until such time as a ransom is paid. Or there's something called wiperware, which allows them to completely delete all the content on a database. I think it's safe to say that if that were to happen to a city or to a school, like it did in 2017, it can be an absolute catastrophe. There was definitely a couple of really scary stories. There was a city that was held at ransom by a hacker for a period of days. None of the systems of the city would work. Absolutely everything came to a grinding halt, including things like police dispatches and garbage collection, and you name it. It was a mess. And so this kind of thing is real. And I think what's really important to recognize is that it does not matter if you are not, a top urban metropolitan market or a top school. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. What hackers are doing now is looking for the schools, looking for the municipalities, looking for the organizations that are the least sophisticated and the most likely to be able to hack easily. And they don't, go and find you in a phone book. What they do is send out little bits of script across the internet and test for vulnerabilities and weaknesses. And so if your systems are not up to snuff, if you're using old browsers and outdated technology that hasn't been patched, isn't secure, isn't supported by the vendor, you're likely to be in real trouble, and that's a very serious issue. There was a huge bulletin put out by the Department of Education last year saying that schools were going to be likely targeted for hacking, and within a matter of weeks, there was a disclosure that a group called School Desk had been hacked by ISIS. Believe it or not, sounds like a sci-fi story, but it's an actual truth. Basically, this vendor, School Desk, provided websites for over 800 schools, and for a period of about a week, there was a page on the homepage of most of those school websites that had a place where you could insert video. Well, ISIS hacked that code and inserted terrorist training videos, which were showing up on the homepages of 800 schools for a period of about a week. So clearly, things like this are incredibly serious. These are things we don't take lightly. These are very, very serious things. The cost of data breaches is predicted to top $6 billion with a B this year. 1 in every 131 emails is now malicious. We got to up our game. Unfortunately, the data doesn't support that boards are ready for this. We've just done this report with the National School Board Association, interviewing about 475 school board members from across the U.S. These are just 4 of the data points. The full report is forthcoming. That's going to be coming out just in time for NSBA's annual conference taking place in April. But here are just some of the scary stats. We asked things like, has your school board ever conducted a security audit of how the board communicates? 82% said no. In fact, that number is a little more frightening when you realize that about 39% said no, and the rest said, what is that? What do you mean by a security audit of board? What does that mean? What's a security audit? A little scary. We asked if their IT and data security teams oversee the security of how the board communicates. Only 13% said that they do. 67% of school boards are not required to have any cybersecurity training at all. Those that are required to have cybersecurity training, the vast majority of that smaller number get it once. Not once a year, once, one time. If they've been on the school board for 10 years, that means that training's a decade old. I got to tell you, hackers are changing their tactics every 3 months. So a one-time only training is completely insufficient. We also asked if there's a cyber crisis communication plan in place. More than half of school boards have no idea if there is one. Another 39% know for a fact that there is not one. So that's basically 90% of boards that don't have a cyber crisis communication plan. I mean, this is really something that boards are going to have to take a look at. And I think if we were to repeat that same study in the municipal market, we probably wouldn't find details much different. The fact of the matter is there is quite a bit of law that's going into effect in some of the states that is holding board members accountable for what happens with cyber risk. And here's the funny thing about it. I think a lot of board members, when you talk to them about these issues, they know this is serious. They're scared of it. But then they say, but our IT team is all over it, which is just kind of interesting. Because if I were to say, what do you think about financial risk? I can't name a board member on the planet who would say, oh, our CFO and the finance team handle that. No, that would be completely unacceptable. You don't get to be a good board member and not realize the major areas of enterprise risk that face your institution and take responsibility over managing and mitigating them. So I think it's very strange that we allow cyber to get a pass when, quite frankly, it is the #1 risk facing our institutions right now. Last year, more than 500 million IDs were stolen in the U.S. of citizens in the U.S. by hackers. This is not a small deal. This is a big deal. This is going to haunt us for decades. So it's time. I'll get off my soapbox now, but it's really pretty scary. To that point, the last couple of seconds here before we turn it over to solutions and some examples, Boardroom culture and dynamics. This is important in all these regards because you want to create a culture of respectful inquiry. You want to foster curiosity, be brave, ask these hard questions, such as, why aren't we dealing with cyber risk in this boardroom? You want to make sure that inside the boardroom, diverse opinions, feel free to attack the issues, not the person. Outside the boardroom, one voice. You don't talk about dissent outside the boardroom. It happens in the boardroom only, and making sure that you are engaging your state associations to get any training that you need to improve the culture of the boardroom. And then finally, it's becoming harder to plan for the future. We are dealing with this universe of what we call VUCA. That's just an acronym that economists use to describe what we're living through. It's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And there's a number of things that continue to plague us. Board diversity continues to be a challenge. Making sure that there is a succession plan in place for administration. I know in the school market, average tenure of superintendents is less than 3 years, and yet when you ask boards if they've got a succession plan in place for replacing a top administrator, the vast majority of them do not. And so these are the kinds of things that I think need to be addressed in 2018, is thinking more beyond the short term and the immediate, and looking more long-term and making sure that the long-term sustainability of the institution or the community that you're overseeing is going to be able to be managed well. So I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Michelle, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the solutions in the government space, and then we'll turn it over to Laura to talk about some of the solutions in the school board space. So Michelle, let me turn it over to you first.
Great. Thanks, Dottie. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for your time today. I'm going to walk through a few live examples of how government agencies are using technology to leverage their projects, their transparency efforts, and even their citizen engagement. I love what Dottie says about how there's data dumping, and then there are ways to use our transparency to help foster community trust. This can help the decision makers in your community make more informed decisions and help your organization reach your entire community. Dottie, would you move to the next slide, please? Perfect. One of the tools to make a priority is mobility. Nowadays, people are very personal about their devices, and most likely they're working off more than just one device. There are a million different types of devices. So by using avenues of reaching people, multiple avenues like social media or dedicated websites that you make sure connect to your main site, and then also by using browser-based platforms so you don't have to worry about reaching just a portion of your community. And really, regardless of what device someone's using, they'll have the same look, feel, and content as someone on a different device. So this allows you to work on projects from the office, or better yet, at home in your PJs. So it gives you that mobility as well. The City of Bryan's done a really outstanding job making sure that they reach everyone, but almost just as importantly, just as important is to find a way to do this that doesn't add work to your busy schedules. Next slide. Dottie's Vanna White for us now. Bryan has leveraged their online presence through their website, social media. They use Twitter, Facebook. They use a citizen survey service named Polko, and then open public meetings. So this has really helped them shape their recent WJB corridor project. So you can see at the bottom of the page here that they laid out the plan of how they were going to approach and execute this project. They made the plan accessible and community-driven. So now the community is part of this in the decision-making process, and they feel more connected to it along the way. All right, next slide. Then what they do is they seamlessly took this data and tracked it at different stages of the project by using Board Docs goal tracking. So not only are they able to track and measure their success or the completion of this project, but then they can go back to each and every meeting or committee or subcommittee that this project was discussed at. They can view results. They can navigate back to the meeting and even watch that specific point in time in the meeting where this was discussed on streaming online video. And the great part about that too is everybody's a little nervous, and I don't blame them. Being on videos is hard enough, but nobody can misinterpret what you say when they watch it on a video that's been recorded. All right, and best part of all this is no extra work. It's literally a button that they click while they're creating their agendas or minutes. This one button ties their entire project into one nice, neat package. Your projects don't even have to be tied back to a specific meeting to be measurable. You have the flexibility to decide how you want it to create it or what your needs are based on each project, strategic plan, capital plan, what have you. They can also include the citizen surveys and the public meeting comments, all stored in Board Docs Library without any data limit. So please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you a little bit more about this and get an idea for what projects you're working on and how we can help improve your transparency. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. That was great. And now I'm going to turn it over to Laura. And Laura, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing in the school community as well.
Sure. Thank you, Dottie. Well, it's very interesting. I've been working with schools now for about 14 years, and a lot of the conversation is the same. And one of the first things, and touching back again on what Dottie said, you know, we want to share information. We're trying to be transparent, and that transparency, of course, just dovetails right in with, you know, engaging the community. So what I see from many districts that I work with that come to Board Docs, change over to us, is the DIY approach. And, you know, it seems like a really good idea, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can see here I've just thrown a few of the logos up there, but some of these things have unexpected consequences because we're going to do it for free. We're going to do it ourselves, and things like Google Drive, very popular. But if you look beyond that, did you know that documents in Google Drive not searchable unless you have a Google account, right? So if I'm not signed in to Google Drive as a public person, I'm not going to be able to easily search. Also, creating these linked up PDF files, which seems like a great idea, and then putting them in Dropbox or Outlook is creating issues. I see a lot of people coming to us because of PDF file sizes and board members having a hard time downloading stuff from Dropbox. They don't have the most up-to-date information. And then a lot of school districts are just putting their files out on their website. So you see Blackboard there, and there's some issues there again with security. And with all of these things, when you're sharing information on a place like Google Drive or Dropbox, you want to check and see what are the terms of using that. If you're putting highly confidential information for board members in Google Drive, you definitely need to be sure that you know exactly what you're agreeing to, because they can crawl your data when they're, you know, because your files are there. So we want to be sure that we're going to use a system where we're going to be protected with that. And that's where Board Docs comes in, really, and for ease of use. Go ahead, Dottie, we can move ahead. So another big idea, another big thing I see that drives school districts to come to Board Docs is, can we make this easy? Instead of having things all over the place, could we make it so everything that is related to the governance of our district is in one easily accessible, intuitive place? So you see here, that's what Board Docs does. We're giving you this dashboard that looks the same no matter who you are. It looks like this for the public, staff, and board members. But because of Board Docs and how we use an advanced role system in order to provide some information to the board, think about student-specific information, the board will see what they should see, public will see what they should. So you can see here with meetings, documents, policies, even showing the progress against our goals. This interface looks the same no matter what type of device you access it from. If you think about different ability levels with board members and other users, some people are not as comfortable with technology. It needs to be easy, and if they get to it from different places, we want it to be the same experience, which ties back to what Michelle was saying as well. Go ahead, Dottie. So, and here's an example again. Make it easy, make it comprehensive. right? So this is an agenda item from a school district that's using board docs. And you can see here, what if you could put everything that had to do with this particular agenda item, whether you're a school district, whether you're a city or a town, in one place. So when I look at an agenda item, no matter who I am seeing the most true depiction of this agenda item. All of its supporting information, the result of the vote, if it was an action item, and video, taking me right to that video. I don't have to go to another place. I don't have to exit out of the system. Make it easy for people to see what happened. Again, this kind of goes along with that data dumping theme. You can have 50 million pieces of information, but if you can't find them, it's really not all that helpful. So board docs, one of our big ideas is put everything that's important together in one place. Go ahead, Dottie. So the other thing is, along with all this, it kind of leads you to getting social, and we can go to the next slide. So, I would say social media is one of the next scary things for school districts. Dottie, can you advance? So, there's a lot of hesitation, but we really need to be looking at this and not just having, our website. That's not enough anymore. And if you look at the adoption and use of social media, we all know that the younger generations are using it. That's a done deal. We know that. But what the data represents is the idea that, now, as we continue to move on, even the more advanced generations are using social media. Grandma and grandpa are having a Facebook, I look at my mom, she's 79, and she's on Facebook so she can see the grandparents, the pictures that she would want to see. So that it's crept into all of the different age groups, and you need to communicate the way that people are now communicating. Go ahead, Dottie, we'll move ahead. So a lot of school districts now are taking that approach with, okay, we're going to have that, a presence on all the different areas. So Facebook, of course, everybody has a web page now, but video on YouTube, are you videoing your meetings if you're going to have a presence there? Instagram is kind of the thing the kids are using along now with Twitter. So all of these different modalities, you need to have a presence and be using them, because that's what people are looking at. You think about here in Atlanta, which is where I live, we had a couple of snow days in the past couple of months. The superintendent from the school district where I live was tweeting, real time, and that's what everybody was watching. They weren't going to the news. They're watching the Twitter account. So, if you got these things, communicate with the parents and the others that way. Go ahead and go forward, Dottie. So here's just a couple of examples of some of the districts that are using board docs, leveraging their social media along with their board docs account. Board docs has a great little way for you to just access and post to your different social media accounts for the district or the city or town or county. And so what these folks are doing is when they release that meeting, they tweet right from board docs, hey, here's the meeting and here's the link to it. Think about the power of getting a link out there for people to accurate information, the real supporting information. And remember, they're only going to see what you want to share publicly. You're not sharing anything beyond that, but this is getting more information out there. You can do the same thing in Facebook when the agenda is released. Hey, the new agenda is available. Imagine being able to get accurate information out there to combat the hearsay that kind of tends to take off sometimes in social media. Go ahead, Dottie. Video. Video is the next great thing, right? It's becoming more and more popular. It's gaining more steam with school districts. I'm seeing a lot of school districts using YouTube. It's free, a great resource. I mean, you could do video of your meetings by simply putting a digital camcorder in the corner, recording it, and uploading it to YouTube. It could be that simple. Or for larger school districts that have media teams and everything, it could be a big complex thing. So, whether you're going to stream or just have it available on demand, the streaming thing, it's a great idea and you'll have some people watch it, but really the on-demand thing, YouTube, and being able to go back and watch it when you want. Remember, streaming, you still have to be available when it's happening. And that streaming thing should not cost you a fortune. right? You shouldn't be paying thousands of dollars a year for that because it's now kind of becoming a commodity. And we want to make that information, again, available with the agenda item. These are the three video sources or video platforms that Board Docs integrates with. YouTube being free, Vimeo's kind of does streaming and storage, and then Swagit kind of is like a soup to nuts kind of organization, but they'll also do basic as well. For us, we chose these tools because they're using open platform, right? They're not proprietary. If you did go somewhere else, you're not going to have a big issue trying to convert data. So that's where Board Docs comes in with video. But that does open up Pandora's box because with video we see some ideas. Go ahead and advance, Dottie. And the last thing this kind of ties into is ADA compliance. You know, all of a sudden ADA compliance has become a thing with the Office of Civil Rights, giving people letters and citations, and this kind of ties in with the video because now there's a lot of things about the video. If you have video, you need to be doing closed captioning. How do we do that? All the services that Board Docs will interface with, you are able to accomplish that, but you're going to have to, you know, take special care to make sure that you are providing those things that are going to allow you to be ADA compliant. Now, Board Docs is ADA compliant, or we've been working directly with the Office of Civil Rights, who, by the way, their standards are actually more stringent than what we see with the WCAG standards. That does not guarantee OCR compliance. So we've been working directly with them to ensure that Board Docs is ADA compliant, and not just for reading stuff, you guys, but for navigation as well, which is one of the things that the WCAG standards didn't address. So when you start incorporating these things, ADA compliance needs to be on your radar. And of course, we can always help you direct you towards resources and things like that because we've worked with so many organizations that are having to be sure that they are ADA compliant. So I think that's all I've got there, Dottie. So I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you both, Michelle and Laura. We got a bunch of questions that came in from the audience, and so I might like to pose a few of the questions that are coming in, and just share with you some of what's on people's mind. And so, Laura, I want to actually just ask you a quick question while you just finished up your presentation. One of the questions that came in was about the reaction of board members to using some of these online tools, and I think the question is really along the lines of if you could share, you know, how comfortable they seem to be and what were some of the challenges of getting them to use this kind of technology.
Right. You know, in every district that I talk to, every organization really, not just school districts, you guys, there are people that you're concerned about, right? You know that this person is not going to be all gung-ho about this. We have found in our experience there are a couple of key things in ensuring success, and the number one thing is get the board on board with it, right? And the thing is, it needs to be an intuitive, easy to use system that doesn't require a whole lot of time from them and is easy to understand and navigate. Now, when you take that base and add on to it training, training is important. Listen, Board Docs is not rocket science. It's easily presented. It's intuitive. But having someone come on site and walk through using a meeting, making notes, voting online, that is key to success. And honestly, going into every training, our trainers report there is always somebody that is not a big, a big proponent for this. But after training, they are like, oh, I can do this. I'm okay with this. So, I mean, it sounds like something a salesperson would tell you, oh, everybody can do it, but honestly, it is true. Once they have had the training and a walkthrough, Board Docs is there. So we have an incredible adoption rate and an incredibly low rate of folks dropping using Board Docs because of that.
Thank you so much. That's great. And Michelle, I have a couple of questions that kind of go back to what you were talking about with the example you used of the city of Bryant. And the question was around what was the most challenging part for Bryant to make these changes? And then sort of a follow-up question, if you have any insight into whether or not the technology itself has changed how they approach developing strategic goals.
So yes and yes. I would say, to piggyback off what Laura said, it was really the mindset at first, because when social media came out, it was very hard to control. Nobody knew how to control it. Nobody knew how to leverage it. And so I think one of the biggest problems that we have is a lot of us have Facebook pages or Twitter, all of the above, but we don't know how to bring it all together into one solution. And so what we've done is we've created a hybrid system. And what that's done is created a lot more work for all of us. So what Brian did was they found one singular way to streamline all of it. And then using Board Docs, they can host it in an unlimited, they can put as much data as they want. All the different subcommittees can use this as well. So it's a really great way to be able to simplify this and give people back their time.
That's great. Thank you so much. And actually, I'm going to, if you don't mind, let me keep you on the line. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question that came in, and then I'm going to have Laura respond to this one as well. So the question was about, in terms of storing everything in one place, how long are the agendas and related documents archived and available? And then also, what happens to agendas and supporting documents and access if the information, if they decide to leave Board Docs and go somewhere else?
Yeah, Laura, you mind if I take that first part?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's the really nice part. In government especially, we're very concerned with making sure that we're meeting our record retention laws. What a lot of people do, because we are never going to charge you any extra for going over a specific data limit, is they may just make the last 3 to 5 years available, but they'll continue to host it in Board Docs. So there's really no need to take it off there. And like what Laura and Dottie both were talking about earlier, adding more information in there to go back and research and to find information is never going to be a bad thing. So if you don't get dinged for it, you might as well keep it up, and we'll do that until the end of time.
I'll add something on to that, Dottie. I had a school district that uses Board Docs in Maryland, and they actually went back and built in history literally back into the 1800s when that school district first was chartered and began and everything. Now, those documents are in calligraphy, so it'd be hard to say that they're really searchable that far back, but it's kind of has a high coolness factor, and it really presents the history of the district. So, it is a good thing. You can, there's a very high amount of data. If you reached with Board Docs, then they would work with you to archive off some additional data if we needed to do that. So, but to Michelle's point, we're never going to say, oh, you're over the magic limit, you need to pay us more money. So that's definitely a good thing.
That's great. Thank you so much, both of you. And Laura, I wonder if you could maybe also just address briefly the last part of that question, which was, so what happens, in the eventuality that if they decide they need to move away from Board Docs for any reason, what happens to all that data?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I missed that. If you, number one, if you decide that you need to leave Board Docs, we're going to try really hard to rectify whatever might be an issue. We're going to work really hard to make sure that you're happy. But in the end, if something happens and you decide to leave, then you give us notice, and we leave the public-facing side of your Board Docs site up for 1 year. And that's really important, right? Because all your stuff is in there, and you're trying to put together a plan for what are we going to do. And then we will provide your data to you in a database format. Now, this is important because there are some organizations out there that when you leave, they won't give you your data. So this is a big deal. Think about all the time and effort to build that data. So we will provide your data to you. We send it to you in a FedEx. Somebody's got to sign for it because it's, unencrypted, and then you can take it to the next provider. If they're worth your time, they should be able to import it right into a new system. So you're never going to lose that history.
Great, thank you so much. And there was one other question that came in, and I think I'll go ahead and address it just because we're right down at the end of the time, and I think it's one that I'm dying to talk about anyway, which was, the question was, so if we're all public institutions, why does cybersecurity matter so much? They're all public records anyway. I was hoping someone would ask me that question. So here's the issue. Yeah, of course, stealing public records is not the issue, right? They're public records. That's not a problem. The problem is, because public institutions have so many public records and are putting them available online, they are absolutely making themselves more vulnerable. And it's not like we have a choice, but you are more vulnerable to having someone take that information and use it to spoof a spear phishing attack or any other type of attack to gain access to the network thereby then getting access to all the stuff that they shouldn't have access to, things like your payroll records and social security numbers of the children that you teach, and information about height, weight, and health records. This is the stuff that is absolutely not okay for people to steal. It's not public records. It's incredibly sensitive, and it needs to be protected. The problem is, for many, many schools and many municipalities, we do a good job of putting the photo of our board members and their names, or maybe even their email addresses, up on our public websites, and that's just kind of like candy to hackers. They can use that to create a fake email that looks like it's coming from that board member or to that board member, and use it to get access to the network by sending them a bad email with maybe ransomware attached or some worm attached that goes in and creates problems throughout the network. So that's really the issue. It's not the public records themselves. It's how the public records get used to create these really insidious attacks. And unfortunately, it is absolutely on the rise. So I hate to leave us on kind of a sour note there, but I will say, one of the good things about all these approaches that we've been talking to you about is they give you new ammunition, new ways to lean in, get your arms around some of these challenges, and really find solutions that are going to work. And so there's just quite a bit that we'd love to share with you. On the slides that we'll be sending out to you are links to our Good Governance blog, our best practice webinars, also a lot of our white papers and research, including that report that I mentioned to you that's forthcoming from NSBA on cybersecurity. So we want to make sure that you have a chance to sign up and receive that. And also, please connect with us. Let us know what we can do to be helpful. And in particular, we'll be sending out as a follow-up today a copy of the recording, as well as the slides and some of these resources, and a short survey. We'd really love to hear from you. Tell us how this webinar was for you. Does this interest you? Is this information that you found valuable? What else could we be telling you? How can we, help get information to you that is going to be relevant and meaningful? So let us know how we can do a good job. And thank you all so much for attending. It's been such a pleasure. And Michelle and Laura and Amanda, thank you all so much. You were all just terrific.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dottie.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.